I'm talking about making music, not noise.
Sorry. The first real boss I ever had was a woman named Ivana. And she was about 8 feet tall, Czech woman who was terrifying. And she gave me a big responsibility, which was to write. The division that we worked in at this university had not been doing a good job of explaining its mission and explaining how wonderful it is and all of its achievements. So that was my job, to come up with a document that would do that. And I threw myself into this task, and I produced this titanic document. It had data and information and facts, and it was fantastic. And I handed it over to her, and she read through it, and she said, in this sort of baritone Czech accent, she said, "I want to give you some advice." And I thought, okay, you reach for the stars, don't change. That's great. And she said, making sound is not the same as making sense, which was not what I had been hoping to hear. But it was good wisdom. It was really good wisdom. And I kept it around and I nurtured it. And so this is what Ivana said, this is what I started with. It evolved into this, which I think is something that we'll all agree with, everybody here in this room. It was a big realization for me, but I think we're all on board with it. And then it evolved further into this idea here. The standards of music can guide us, and that's what I want to talk through today. This is a metaphor. I want to be clear. It's not a formula. It's not like a magic 12 steps to create the perfect document or anything like that. It's a helpful metaphor for understanding when documents fail, why they fail. I have, since that talk with Ivana, these are all the different types of documents I realized. I made a list of every kind of document I have written or commissioned or worked with. And a lot of these have worked, some of them have really not worked. And this metaphor has helped me many times understand what has gone wrong and how they can be improved. So I'm going to start with the idea of noise. So what is noise? The normal, usual definition is noise is whatever I hate to listen to, which is actually a good definition. That is good. What I'm going to focus on here is the more formal definition, which is that it's sound without structure. When you take sound and you put it inside a framework of satisfying structure, you get music. What is fascinating to me is that search for structure is hardwired into our brains. If you take a human person and put them into an MRI, into kind of a brain scan, and you play unfamiliar music for that person, as the piece starts to evolve and they start to see the patterns and understand the structure, the intellectual centers of their brain start to light up. And as it evolves further, as the song progresses and there should be little surprises and little pleasant things that pop up, the pleasure centers of their brain light up. You have the most ancient area of the brain and the most evolutionary modern part of the brain sort of in this big electrical storm of ecstasy. Let me give you another example. Infants, babies. Okay, that was the brain we talked about. Let's talk about baby brains. You'll have to trust me on the science of this, but if you expose babies to sound, you will find that they naturally respond to pitch and tempo and chord changes. If you expose them to dissonance, they do not like it. So this idea that what an individual, what you count as satisfying, is going to vary from person to person. It's going to vary from culture to culture, absolutely. But the fact of satisfaction is universal. The search for structure in sound is universal, and I propose here today that it provides us a good way of understanding documents. So let's start with an example. I'm in a band. I mean, I'm not in a band. I should not be in a band. But let's suppose, imagine I'm in a band, and I get together with my 4 bandmates, and we play a song for 4 minutes, or we try to. Because what we do is, we're all very good musicians, and we play for 4 minutes, but we don't pay any attention at all to what the other person is doing. None. We just do our thing. On top of each other, no attention to harmony, tempo, any of that kind of thing. And when I'm finished, I take the recording, and I say, look, it's a song. Anybody listening to that will say, no, it's not. It's not a song. It's noise. It's unlistenable. Even a baby encountering what we just did would say, no, it's not a song. What's interesting is that we automatically reject that from the age of, 2 months. But with documents, we wind up accepting documents that are failed in very similar ways, that are messed up in similar ways, but we don't have the same automatic, evolutionarily produced detector for documentation noise that we do for sound noise. So if I am working on a document and I have to produce this thing, and it's got to have 30 sections and 9 different elements, and I do that. I make the 30 sections, I make the 9 elements, I put everything that needs to be there, and I'm finished, and I say, good, here's my document. I've done my job. I've done my job if my job is to take a lot of information and pour it into a bucket. Yeah, that I've done. If my job is actually to facilitate communication and the transfer of knowledge, it's very unlikely I've done my job because I haven't paid attention to that. In this example, I haven't thought about any of those kinds of things. I haven't even considered, would anybody actually enjoy reading this document? I haven't considered that. And so the likelihood that I've produced something that somebody will enjoy and that will successfully transfer information and knowledge and understanding is small. Without theme and harmony and a pleasing tempo, you have a document that makes sound without making sense. So asking, does this document contain the necessary information? That's important. You need to ask that. It's a vital question. It should be the first question. It should never be the last. So what I want to talk about next is deliberate noise, which I find really interesting. I think that most noise is inadvertent. It's accidental. Sometimes you get noise that serves a purpose. So we'll start with an example from the web. Here's a riddle for you. What is the biggest lie on the internet? The most common big lie on the internet? So what I would like to do with you, my friends, is go through a terms of service agreement from our friends at Apple. For the sake of this exercise, we are going to assume that you can read a page in 90 seconds, which is very generous. I timed myself. I was nowhere close to 90 seconds. But let's assume a reader who's just super sharp and fast, okay? Here we go. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4. There's a reason why the average song is under 4 minutes. Even an interesting melody will tend to get tedious after 4 minutes, and we're at 12 already. Iron butterflies In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida runs for an absolutely scintillating 17 minutes and 4 seconds. We passed that 1 Hey Jude ago. And we continue. Here, this I love. We're not just going to bore you, we will shout at you too. And we continue, and we go on, and we go on, and on, and on, and we end. That was 29 pages. So, how long is 29 pages? Well, let's take a look. It's In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida plus Hey Jude plus Hey Yeah plus Oops, I Did It Again, Rumor Has It, When Doves Cry, and half of Don't Cry For Me, Argentina. You know, we all know no meaningful attempt at communication would be like this. So it is tempting to look at that agreement and think it's a failure, to think that that is a failed document. That document absolutely commits so many sins, it doesn't work. The thing is, it's not a failed document. The document, we think that the purpose of a document should be to promote understanding. That's what I believe. The purpose of this document, there are two goals. One is to protect the legal interests of Apple, and the other is to get you to click yes, I accept. And it works great at that. Everybody clicks I accept, nobody reads it. It's a very effective use of noise. The goal is to produce acquiescence, and it does that. That's often what noise in documents does. When it's intentional, it's to get you to acquiesce. It seems like an exercise in communication, it isn't. So, an example from the work environment. I have spent a lot of my career in hospitals and healthcare and research, academia. These are all areas where regulations are important. So this is a sort of composite example. So let's suppose, okay, new federal regulations have come out. And they're not very long, 2 pages or so, but they're very important to the organization. So the organization assigns somebody who we'll call Joe to study the regulations and issue documentation. He does that. He puts the documentation up on the web. And it's awful. It's the formatting is a mess, and it's not indexed well. You can't find information. The terms are badly defined. The examples are hard to follow. When Joe puts it out there, he says to everybody, if you have any questions, come to me. I'll help you out. I'll tell you what you're allowed to do. So people try to make sense of the documentation, which is essential to their jobs. They need to follow these regulations, and they can't understand it. And they conclude the documentation, the rules must be really complicated because this is way over my head. Thank God we have Joe. So Joe ends up getting a stream of people to his door, and he spends his days sitting back at his desk saying, approved, not approved. This is okay, this is not okay. You have succeeded, you have failed. So what has happened is this, by producing lousy documentation that is full of noise and hurts your head, Joe has increased his authority in the organization. He has earned himself greater job security. He's essential. Joe goes away, you can't depend on the documentation, Lord knows. So which is it's a pity, it's an irony. OSHA will protect you from environmental noise, which is good. It's good they do that, but documentation noise, you're on your own. And we've heard so many great presentations about creating a culture of documentation, which is absolutely essential. But we also need to inculcate this value that the quality of the documentation absolutely matters, and that it actually shouldn't be awful to experience it. A musical document succeeds by feeding your brain what it craves, what it needs. Oftentimes in a situation like I described with Joe, I have seen many times, and your organizations might be much less dysfunctional than the ones I've sometimes experienced. But people oftentimes will come and say to somebody like Joe, hey, when you get a chance, could you improve the documentation? When you get around to it, could you make it less awful? And those questions are a symptom of the fact that enjoyable documentation is seen as this superfluous thing. Like it's something that you grant if you feel like it, but it's really not essential. You're supposed to hate the documentation. Without having harmony and an appropriate length and tempo, a recognizable theme, surprises that maintain interest, a melody that resonates, what you have is a document that makes sound without making sense. What we end up with is something, by neglect, we have this understanding that documentation is supposed to hurt. And I think we can do better. music-like satisfaction. This is the principle I feel like I want to evangelize to everybody I talk to, is that it's not a nice to have, it's not an extra, it's essential. It increases people's understanding, it increases their absorption, it increases goodwill, and I think maybe most importantly, it just makes the world a better place. Thank you. Yeah, we can do 2 or 3 questions if there's any, or if we go right to the break, whatever people. Yeah.
Hi, my question is, you said that the brain doesn't have a built-in way to sort of make music out of docs. Have you found any ways of approaching docs in this way, just kind of improve their overall quality?
Yeah, that's yes, and that's a long. I mean, it's a good answer would be a long answer. I think. Well, I talked one of the slides here. I had consideration of length and tempo. These things seem obvious, but reviewing a document, again, there's this tendency to say when you review the document, does it have all the elements? That's the question that people tend to ask. But there should be a question: is this a tempo that makes sense? Has it gone on for pages, plodding away at the same point, or has there been some variation in the tempo? Has this been a satisfying pace? So what I find is, people have talked, excellent points about testing documentation. I do that. I think that's really important. And in part of the test, I think what I always like to ask people is, did you actually enjoy what you were experiencing? We don't, with music, we got this instantaneous revulsion effect. With documentation, it's sort of a creeping dread, and a resignation that you're just supposed to suffer through it. And so I like to really reinforce that value whenever I ask people for their reactions. The first thing I ask is, did you find it satisfying?
Great. One more? I guess.
Do you have any good examples? So I read a lot of documentation, and people are always asking me, like, what's your favorite document? And I really have a hard time coming up with them. So do you have any kind of favorites that really show this being done well?
No, I only like to find bad things. It's much more, it's much more satisfying. I do. One of the things that's difficult is there are so many different kinds of documentation. Now that's, you saw that list. I mean, there's such a wide variety. I think some of the examples that we've seen about, I'm not a programmer at all, but I've looked at Python documentation and it's well done. I think I don't have a good answer. I think it's a great question, and what I have wanted to do for a while is to come up with a. I think I'm a big fan of best practices. I'm also a fan of worst practices. I think you can learn a lot from a worst practices analysis, and I want to come up with something that would sort of a side-by-side, best practices and documentation, worst practices, because you can learn from both. It's like that before and after effect. We'll talk again in a year, and hopefully I'll have time.
Sounds great.
Okay.
All right, thank you.